A lot of sports happening at this time of the year, but this week specifically, there's really only one thing worth talking about, and that is the NFL Draft. In just over 3 days, all eyes will be on Green Bay and Lambeau Field and the Tennessee Titans with the first pick of the night. Now, the draft represents endless possibilities and hope for both the teams and players involved. Carolina Panthers hoping that this year finally lands the kind of players that can really get this rebuild off the ground. And to help discuss the Panthers with the number 8 overall pick, I am joined by the creator, founder, extraordinaire of Carolina Blitz, Ms. Vashti Hurt. Vashti, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show. Now, you've been covering this team a long time. You've been to a couple of drafts. We've talked about it before. We've been in this situation before. Top 10 pick, a lot of positions in need. Let's just start with, what do you think is the biggest thing Carolina should be looking for on draft night?
Obviously, defense.
Right.
They need an edge rusher, or they need somebody who could help aid their edge rushing attack. And you know, there are a couple of positions that are in the NFL these days are essential to having a good team. That's quarterback and that's edge rusher. And the Panthers have their quarterback. Now they need to get their edge rusher, their defensive guy along that line.
It's kind of a good position to be in, where you have multiple positions of need, especially on that defense. You look at the numbers, this team gave up more points in the season than any other team in NFL history, more rushing yards than any other team last year, over 3,000 on the ground. So there's a lot of places you can go, but you're right. The edge specifically feels like a place that this team needs to be looking for in the draft. And the good news is this draft in particular is pretty deep at edge. So I know some people have already talked about the idea of maybe you don't need to get your guy at 8. Maybe you can trade back a little bit and see who's there in the teens, maybe even the 20s. What do you feel like would be a good scenario for this team if a trade back was on the table?
I feel like Dan Morgan finding a desperate team who really wants to move up and then allow him. And I think that, you know, we talked to him last week. They have multiple scenarios, right?
Right.
I think ideally they want to trade back. They know who they want, but for them, they want to acquire more picks. So maybe there's a big jump between their first round and their second round pick. So maybe they could sell their 8 and then get a guy in between there. And that, I think that would be a perfect scenario for Dan Morgan.
And it's a scenario where we haven't seen the Panthers with the ability to trade back in a while. We saw them trade up last year to go back into the first round, get Xavier Legette, and now you see them possibly trading in the back. Are there any players specifically maybe in the first round that you think they're targeting, or any players you think might be a good fit for this defense?
I don't know. I mean, they've been holding their cards pretty close to vest, right? I do think they'll go defense. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if they go best player available. I think the general consensus is after those top guys, there's just a lot of parity in that first round.
Right.
You could really hit or you could really miss on any of those guys. And so I think that because there's so much depth within those first round caliber players, that if you're a guy like Dan Morgan, you hope that you really can't go wrong in any type of scenario. But a particular player, it's pretty tough once you get past those top guys.
Yeah, well, one particular player who a lot of people have been circling for the Panthers in mock drafts has been Jaylen Walker, the outside linebacker / edge. You talk about kind of two positions of need. He's from the University of Georgia. We know what those defensive players have done when they get to the league. And he's a guy that seems like he could fit in Ejiro Evero's scheme. What are your thoughts? What have you been hearing about Jaylen Walker as a possibility at 8, or maybe even a trade back candidate?
Did you see him at his workout? I mean, goodness, this is a grown man. He looks like he's already been in the league for 3 or 4 years. Look at that. That's crazy. There's a lot of upside for him. I don't know if, and I've heard from just multiple scouts, some of them have him as a guy who could come in and make an immediate impact, and then some say that he might be someone that, you know, comes around like Derrick Brown. Derrick Brown didn't come in and make an immediate impact, but years 2, 3, we saw him finally come into himself. So that's who I think Jaylen Walker is more of. And then at that point, you have to have grace, right? Fans have to give him grace. Coaching staff has to give him grace if he's not someone that comes and makes an immediate impact.
And you talk about, you know, having some patience and some grace. I feel like we didn't see a whole lot of that last year. Xavier Legette, first-round wide receiver, had some ups and downs, showed some flashes, but the jury is kind of still out on if he will be an impact player going forward. You look at Jonathan Brooks, the running back taken in the second round, had some flashes, but then a second ACL surgery. So you're talking about 2 guys taken with your first 2 picks that aren't really contributing right away. And then you still have some question marks about, you know, Trevor Wallace might be one of the lone bright spots. I think he was a great addition to the defense, really stepping up. But then you have a lot of unknowns. So I think that's the biggest thing, no matter what position you're looking at. The Panthers Nation is really just hoping that you get a guy that will be an impact player at whatever position that is. And so looking at, again, a lot of different positions, I feel like we're talking about edge and linebacker a lot. Are there any other positions you feel like need to be addressed in the draft, even if it's day 2 or day 3 for Carolina?
Safety. I mean, how many guys are on the roster at safety?
I believe 3. Let me see if Damani Richardson, Nick Scott, Trevon Moehrig. I believe are the 3 safeties you have on the roster.
You can't go into a regular season with 3 safeties. So I think they have to address safety. Obviously, I do think that they'll need to add some depth to that linebacker position. And then wide receiver, you know, and I'm not of the mind that Xavier Legette is not the guy. But I do think he had a rough first year with catching the ball. However, he was able to get separation, which was a knock for some of those wide receivers. They do need to add speed. And whether they add speed via the draft or they are able to make some type of draft day trade scenario where they're able to add speed in that wide receiver room, I think that that's important as well. Yeah,
so you kind of just touched on it here, but the defense obviously needs a lot of work. The offense, though, if you want to get Bryce Young some more help, we saw the development, we saw the second half turnaround, the speed, the wide receiver room, what are some of the biggest things in addition to that you feel like they need to try to surround Bryce Young with if they want to see him take another step forward in his 3rd year in the league?
Well, Dave Canales says he wants to be stubborn with the run. And this year he's going to have to be stubborn with the run. And, you know, you have Chuba Hubbard, who was a 1,000-yard rushing back. You bring in Rico Dowdle, who was a 1,000-yard rushing back in Dallas. So can those guys be the first 1,000 rushers since Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams? I think they potentially could be. They have a line that's good enough. They have a line who likes to run the ball. So he has to be stubborn with the run and then now have play action open up things for Bryce. But like I said, add some speed to that outside. I think Xavier is your red zone guy. He can get up and catch that ball, but you have to have somebody who can stretch the field and is a threat for opposing defenses to stretch the field.
Yeah, well, it should be an exciting first round regardless. It feels like in years past we've had a little bit more of a blueprint. We had a feeling Panthers were targeting a wide receiver last year. They went out, got Xavier Legette. This year, there's a lot of different directions in which they could go, and that makes things pretty exciting. So really quick, let's take a look at what the board looks like for the Panthers. These are all of the picks that they have, 9 total selections in the draft. As Vashti just said a second ago, a long gap between the first round and second round. You're talking from 8 to 57, so that's a very good reason a trade could be on the table to add some more second round depth. And then you see all of the trades from years past coming into play here and where some of those picks are coming from. Last year, Rams landed that 57th pick. That was a trade trading back with the Jonathan Brooks trade. The Jonathan Mingo trade to the Cowboys brought in that pick at 114 in the 4th. Brian Burns trade got a 5th rounder from the Giants. Deontay Johnson netting a 5th round pick at the expense of a 6th round selection from the Ravens. So 9 total selections. Sounds really good at face value, but when you look at the board, heavily concentrated in the middle round. So you're saying it would make a lot of sense to try to add some stuff in the top end to try to get a little bit of a second round pick on day 2.
Absolutely. And, you know, Dan, and historically the Panthers haven't hit in those middle rounds. They have to this year. I mean, it's not even a question. As general manager, that has to be a focus for Dan Morgan and that scouting department is to find those diamonds, those first round talents that may have slipped to the 3rd and 4th rounds, especially since that's where your capital is concentrated, as you just mentioned. But also try to finagle some things, get an earlier second round pick, and also keep a first round guy. They're going to have their work cut out for them, but I think they're prepared for it.
Yeah, well, we know one thing about Dan Morgan. He wants dogs on this team, so whatever position, we're expecting that to be a key trait of what they're looking for up in Green.